Hey everyone, in this training video, we're gonna do the complete training overview on our excavator. So we get a lot of requests. We've done a lot of separate videos on individual components, but what we thought is we'd do one long version to pull all those pieces together. So check this out. Hey everyone, so again, in this one longer excavator training video, what we're gonna do is combine all of our individual videos that we've done on our YouTube channel. So there'll be 4 sections to this video. The first is our pre-op inspection of the excavator. The second will be our basic controls, or we call it 101 training. The third will be more advanced skills, our 201 training. And the fourth and final section will be parking or shutdown of the equipment. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, for our pre-op inspection, now today we are running a Komatsu PC210 excavator. This entire video, we're gonna try and keep it somewhat generic, just so it really applies to any excavator. But first and foremost, I always recommend checking the service manual for whatever piece of equipment you have, because they're gonna have individual checklists for the equipment. Now for the pre-op inspection, arguably I would say it's the most important piece of your day. It's often overlooked, but you need to go around that machine every time in the morning before you're gonna operate it. So this is gonna be the most important piece. And the final part of this, I'll tell you up front, I'm not a mechanic, nor a lot of you watching this probably aren't. You don't need to be. I think a lot of people get intimidated about doing a pre-op because they may not even know what they're looking at. First of all, you should get to know your equipment. Obviously, as an operator, you should know if you hear or see things. But really, a lot of the pre-op, I tell people don't get intimidated. It's just, if it doesn't look right, it just means you need to look into it deeper, and that often can mean a call to your distributor to have a service person come out. So I'm gonna go ahead and go over the pre-op inspection here. Now again, if you've seen my other pre-ops, everyone's got a certain different way. The way I do it, I usually break it into 3 different components. My first is my walk around. It's just a general overview of the equipment where I look at anything visual that sticks out. My second is my compartment check. That's where I'm actually opening the doors, checking fluids, things like that. And my third and final piece is in the operator seat, so getting in the cab. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started with the first piece. So with my pre-op, I try and do a consistent routine. I like to go counterclockwise, so I somewhat do the same routine. Now my first walk around, I always start on the operator side, kind of the driver's side of it. And I usually try and start top to bottom, kind of left to right. With the excavator, I try and do the arms separately after I go all the way around. But when I'm looking, I can see just from a big picture, look at anything obvious that might stick out. I start at the top of the operator's compartment. You're looking if there's any damaged glass, any damage to the cab at all, anything obvious, like is the mirror there, some of those basic things that we overlook. All the way, if I see any damage on top of the compartment, back by the engine compartment in the back, I'm looking at that. Most importantly though, you're looking at the undercarriage. So on the undercarriage, obviously it's one of the most important components, so you want to make sure you're checking your undercarriage daily. On this, you've got your idlers in the front, you got the final drive in the back. First of all, you're just doing an overall image. Does anything obvious stick out? So generally you're looking at the top rollers, the bottom rollers. I'm looking at, again, the idlers and the drive in the back. I usually just do a once over going all the way around. You're looking at all the same thing, the track pads, seeing if there's all the pins and bushings for the tracks are there. Your rollers don't look like there's anything obstructing them, there's any damage to them anywhere around. And then for your final drive in the back, I'm looking to see if there's any leaks or anything coming out of that, as well as the sprockets themselves. On the sprockets, you're looking right there to see the teeth. If they're too sharp, that's something that needs to be addressed. You don't want to have them too sharp. But I'm looking for any obvious damage to this. On the track pads, you can actually see bolts going all the way around, connecting those. You can't see everything because the undercarriage, the bottom's there, but you're just trying to see if anything's obvious. The spacing on all the track shoes going all the way around. Again, it's some things that are just more basic. If you see something that doesn't look right, that's where you might dive deeper. You're also looking to make sure all of these, if there's a kink in one of these, 1 or 2 that might be locked up, that's probably normal. If you see multiple of these that were out of alignment, they could be kind of seized up with the pins in there. You might want to look at that. And then overall, I'm just looking at the track sag. Is it too tight? Is it too loose? The manual is going to tell you the specs on that. So you're going to want to look at your overall track to see what that is like. With that said, we're going to keep moving around to the back. Now coming around the rear of the excavator, again, I like to start top to bottom. You can see the exhaust stack up top. Anything obvious damage, if you have a backup camera in there, making sure that's intact, the counterweight, everything looks, obvious damage, things like that. And then really you're going underneath the thing. So this is, for any machine, I tell people, look underneath. This is, I think I've told people before, when you have a car parked in the garage, if you pull it out and you see oil spots, that's a good indicator something's wrong. So when I'm looking underneath, I'm seeing anything was dripping that I might need to look into. I'm making sure all the compartments, everything's sealed underneath the engine there. And then this is a good time to look at the inside of your drives on the back here. I can kind of see if there's any obvious damage, anything I can see on the swing table there, anything that really sticks out. All looks good there, so we'll keep moving on. Continuing on, we're on the, I call it passenger side, the other side of the machine. Same thing, starting on the top, looking down. You do have some mirrors there. I'm looking for any obvious damage, anything like that. And then I'm just repeating the same thing on my undercarriage on this side. Looking underneath, seeing if all the rollers, everything's free, there's nothing, looks like any damage, nothing leaking. I've got my final drive in the back. The same thing with that. I'm going to be looking to see if my sprocket none of the teeth seem too sharp at all. There's nothing leaking from the final drive, any damage there. Going along with all my track shoes, making sure they look really even spacing in there. None of these look seized up with the pins and bushings in there. And then going around to the front to the idler, making sure there's nothing, no rocks, no damage, anything in there that I might need to look at further. And then overall, again, that same track sag. There's always going to be a little bit of sag in there. You don't want them too tight, you don't want them too loose, and this is something you'd want to look in your manual to get your specifics. But everything looks good on this side. And then we go to the front of the excavator. So I start with the main cab of the machine, or really the main arm and everything in here. But this is where I can get up close here, looking again, any overall damage to the front of the cab, any glass broken, anything like that. But then I can also see in here, and this is where I can see all my hydraulic lines, whatever I can see from right here. Looking to make sure everything, the grease, it looks like everything's greased appropriately. There's nothing leaking, no damage on that. And then it's same thing, I'm gonna go down low and look underneath from the front to see if I see anything on the idlers, on the inside there, or anything underneath, anything on the swing, the table there that might have any damage. Then we're gonna continue on to the arm. Then we move on to the arm, the workhorse of the machine with the tool. But I'm looking, starting at the top, I'm looking all the hydraulic cylinders, wherever you can see, you're looking right around the base or where they enter. If there was a leak on that, generally you might see some dirt, sand, something, because that oil, the material will stick to it. So you're looking for that silver to be relatively clean, that you don't want anything on there at the base of those. But I'm also looking at my grease joints, my hydraulic lines, anything I can see that's visible outside the machine here, coming all the way down. And I'm looking on one side here, then I'm coming into the bucket. My bucket, I'm making sure that the pins, bushings, everything's intact there. I've got them locked, the bolts locking these things in, so everything's connected. Then I'm looking on this side of the bucket for any obvious damage on there. I'm looking at my cutting teeth and my cutting edge on those. These can get worn down. If they get worn down, they'll need to be replaced. If I'm looking for any other damage, and then we'll go to the other side. And then on this side, I'm looking for the same things. Starting, looking up at the top, seeing if I see any damage, looking at the hydraulic cylinders, if I see anything that looks like it might be leaking. My line's going all the way up, coming down, I see all the connections to the cylinder, seeing if there's any damage on this. Same thing, making sure all the bolts are connecting these pins in there. Anything, making sure they look greased appropriately, nothing stands out. You can look at the back of the bucket, make sure there's no damage here. Everything, these are all connected good, though they look like they've been lubricated with grease. And then the same thing on this side of the bucket, look and see if there's any damage or anything like that. That completes my walk around. Now next we're gonna go into the compartments. Okay, so again, now do my compartments around this side. So this is our cabin air filter. This one is take a key. I do recommend opening every compartment, but some of these, like our cabin air filter, we check weekly on our machine here. But the rest of them, anything that you can open easily, I always recommend opening. So on this side, open this, it's my cooling stack, air conditioning, the radiator, things like that. You're looking for any damage to any of these. There is a screen back there too that you want to make sure is not clogged up. There's no debris or anything on it. Looking at all that. From there, I'm looking at my air filter. This is where we don't generally take it out, usually not daily, weekly we'll probably pull it out, but there's a discharge there that you can push to make sure if there was a lot of debris to come out of that, that might indicate I should pull it out. My intake, making sure there's nothing blocking that air intake there, that valve there. And then I've got my coolant level is right here, showing full right there. And then my battery disconnect, if I needed to touch that, was there. But again, overall, looking if there's any damage to any wires, hoses, anything obvious that sticks out. Coming around to the other side. This is where I'm checking, you know, again, when I can see in there any lines, anything like that that might be damaged. Filters are in here. This is where my fuel filter, and this is where the sight glass is. If I were to see any debris in there, ice, if it was in the wintertime, water or anything like that, you'd want to drain that out. It looks clear, there's a sight glass there. And then looking over my hydraulic oil level is up here on the side, there's a mark. Also understanding when you check your hydraulic levels, remember what your boom and, I mean, basically all the hydraulic cylinders are. To get this most accurate, they recommend having everything extended out. But for our daily, if we know what that level should be when it's looked in this configuration, I know that I can look at that mark and see if it's appropriate. Then we're gonna go up top to cover the rest of the items. 3 points of contact anytime you're climbing up or down these things. Again, I like to open every single compartment just to make sure. With this one, just a washer fluid in here, and we have our fire extinguisher in this one, so making sure everything is good there. The next one is our diesel exhaust fluid. Our DEF, this is where we would fill, but nothing really. We would need to, there'll be an indicator inside the cab if we needed to fill that. And then we're gonna continue up to the top of the machine. Once you're up on top of the machine, then we're looking down. This is where a lot of the guts of that machine, and especially your hydraulics, all connect in here. So I'm looking at all the connections. The main control valves are in there. That's where if you're gonna see any damage or anything to any of the hoses, any of the connections look loose. Our swing oil, right there, you're gonna wanna pull that daily to make sure that that is appropriate. And then again, overall, just looking to see if anything sticks out. Then this is a good opportunity to look at the back of the boom arm. So I've got all of my piping here for the hydraulics, and I've also got my grease. So if I see anything along the top, it's also a good time while you're up on top here to look at the welds on the arms, on the boom and stick, to see if there's any damage to the overall arm on the machine itself. If obviously you saw any welds that didn't look solid, that is a really serious thing you want to look at. So, but everything looks good here. Okay, finally we're going to check the engine compartment. So on this, couple pieces, I'm gonna check my engine oil right there. Make sure that's appropriate. You're gonna wanna check that daily. And then this is, again, a good time just to look at the overall everything on there. If you, the hoses, the wiring, everything, if you see anything obvious with any damage. My coolant is also over there. If the engine's cold, I'll often will pop the coolant cap off. This machine's actually been running a little bit, so when it's warm, you do not wanna take that off. We did check the glass down there, the coolant fill. But other than that, you're looking at everything else. Looks good, looks appropriate. We're good there, we'll move on. After that, the final piece of the pre-op is the operator seat. So let's go in, check the cab. First and foremost, make sure the door lock's open. You always want to make sure there's a lock on these and that's solid. And then this is a good time to check all those steps too. It's always 3 points of contact, make sure everything's intact there, and then climb on up. When I'm in the cab, first checking the seat belt, make sure that works. That's good there. And then a lot of it's just the obvious checking the controls, making sure there's free range of motion on the controls, making sure these boots are intact, safety lock lever is working. I've got full range of motion on the track pedals. And then just checking everything else to see. Sometimes seeing any obvious damage on the inside of the cab is something to call out. After that, I'll start the machine up. I turn it one click. Almost all machines nowadays are gonna run through kind of a check to make sure everything's good. So I'm gonna see usually a warning pop up if there's anything that's out of normal. Right now, everything, I'm getting a green light here to go. Turning it on, and then I like to just let it run for 30 seconds to a minute and see if, again, you're gonna hear something. If something doesn't sound right initially, that's gonna be an indicator, but I'm also looking at my display screen, making sure everything's good. If I'm starting the day, I'm making sure I got a full tank of fuel for diesel exhaust, making sure I'm appropriate there, and then anything else. From that, at the end of the pre-op, making sure you document that if there is any issues. It is very important, especially if you're an employee, that you wanna cover your bases. If there's any damage or anything you note on the machine, you want to report that at the beginning of your shift. You don't want to wait till the end. But it's extremely important to do a really thorough pre-op. That's going to extend the longevity of your machine. So make sure you do a thorough pre-op every day. That completes that. Now we're going to be able to move on to the next segment. Okay, we're on to the next section. This is our basic controls, our 101 training. I'll preface this for any operators. We like to really dumb it down because there's a lot of people that are just starting in this entry-level training. So I'm gonna go over some very basic controls here on the machine. Now, first and foremost, you saw the pre-op, very important there. Coming in, 3 points of contact. Surprisingly, that's probably when most job site accidents happen, is getting in and out of equipment. So make sure you use 3 points. And then also, all machines, I think I've said this in other videos, have a door lock. So understanding that, first of all, make sure that door is locked open when you open it. I've seen this happen too many times where someone flings the door open and then they don't lock it. Next thing you know, a gust of wind or something, they get hit right in the back of the head. So you want to make sure it's locked, and there's always a release. So like our Komatsu has it right on the inside here that'll basically unlock the door so you can swing it shut. We operate with closed cabs here. You know, everyone's a little bit, they may have open, they may have glass up, but it really, obviously to get the full protection, it's nice to have that cab completely sealed. Now again, we're in a Komatsu PC210. I'm gonna go over basic controls here. This will apply to any machine. We're gonna go over, we run ISO or standard controls, or some people call them CAT controls. That's probably the most standard one that I would recommend for a new operator. That's gonna be your right hand's boom bucket, left is stick and swing. The other is SAE or backhoe pattern, which is an alternative that some people use. There is no right or wrong. It's really your preference. ISO is the more standard one. So if you're just starting, I'd recommend learning that version. We do have a separate video on our YouTube channel that covers SAE and ISO because all the newer machines are fairly easy to swap between the settings. So now with that said too, every machine has some safety device with a safety lock lever or something like that. So this Komatsu's over here, it's a red bar you pull back on. Basically if the doorway is open, meaning there's nothing crossing in front of it, that machine is not live. So right now you can touch anything you want, nothing's gonna work. What you'll do is you'll pull that back to make everything live. Some of the other machines will push a bar forward. Again, there's a lot of different versions, but almost every single one I've seen will have a bar, something crosses in front of that doorway. The other piece, I think, seatbelt. You know, it's very important. I've seen a lot of operators that are just so busy they won't put a seatbelt on, but the rollover, the cab you're in can't protect you if you're not wearing a seatbelt. So you want to make sure that you're in that, because if you were to roll, something were to happen to the machine, you want to have your seatbelt on. Now, that said, I put lock lever up. For this one, throttle it up over on the right here for our Komatsu machine. Now, most machines, we have an auto idle on this, so what that means is, you know, even if you throttle up right now, you hear the engine didn't actually go up. It doesn't do it until you make an input to a joystick. So I'm gonna go over one motion at a time. Now, a right is boom and bucket. The B is over on your right, S is left. So B, S. I like that little way to remember that pretty easily. So with my right hand, if I pull back, that's gonna raise my boom arm up. The boom arm is that big arm that's right outside next to your window here. That's the main cylinder. That'll go boom up. If I go right hand forward, that'll bring the boom down. If I go to the right, it's gonna open the bucket. And if I go to the left, it'll close the bucket. Now you'll see I'm just barely using a finger here. I think for a new operator, it's being sensitive with the controls. You don't wanna muscle these things. I'll show you in a sec what that looks like. So that's our right. Left is our stick and swing. So stick, if I push forward, it pushes the stick out. I've also heard some people call the stick the dipper. There's a few different verbiage that people use. We call it a stick. That's out. Left hand pull back is stick in. And then our swing or spin, again, people call it different things, is left or right with that left. So if I go to the left, it'll spin left. If I go right, it'll spin right. And on those, the spin, there's no hard stop. That thing will just keep going around and around and around as much as you let it. So you'll see I'm going really gentle with the joystick here. This again, with hydraulics, smooth and gentle. What you see a lot of new operators, if you go hard like this and let go, that's what's gonna really jerk that machine. They don't like that. And that's also how you can tell a new operator on a job site, because the machine's all bouncing around. So be really gentle with those hydraulics. Now, that's the two joysticks. Then your drive controls, the track paddles in front. Now there's foot controls here. They also have your hands, either one. A new operator, sometimes I tell to use your hands. I'm gonna use foot controls today. It really doesn't matter. I don't recommend for a new operator to have your feet on there and your hands on your joysticks. It's just a little bit brain overload. So sometimes you don't even know you're spinning while you're driving. So I usually tell a new operator, either you're using the track paddles or you're using the joysticks. It's one or the other. It's basically the top of the machine or the bottom. Don't use both initially. Now driving position. A lot of different, again, there's no right and wrong here. And some people will argue hardcore one way or the other. It really doesn't matter what you're comfortable with. Generally, our driving position or transport position, there's different verbiage for that, is similar to what you're seeing here. I'd probably go a little bit lower. We usually have our boom up, stick straight down, and our bucket maybe a foot off the ground. You know, generally you don't want to be too high, because if you were driving on a site, you don't want to be at upper body or head height of anyone that might be on the site. So you want to be somewhat near the ground. That's, you know, I think this gives the best visibility when your boom arm's like that. I can still see through my right window over here, and I have pretty good visibility. Some other, you can actually curl this bucket all the way in, and you can tuck everything if you're really in a very confined space. This machine will actually go pretty compact here, so I can tuck everything in and be really tight. The problem is I lose a lot of my visibility anywhere on the right here, so that's generally why I don't like that one if you don't have to. The other version of this one, if you keep it tucked, you can just raise it all the way up and out of the way. And the challenge with this one is from overhead obstructions. If there is anything above your job site, power lines, this is not an ideal position. Gives you the best visibility, but again, there's a happy medium, I think. Generally, I'd recommend talking to someone at your job site. Maybe an employer has a preferred method. There's not really a right or wrong. So, but again, I'm right off the ground, bucket flat. So with that said, now let's start driving. I'm gonna, again, move my feet over there. Each one of those controls one of your tracks. So if I push the right one forward, goes forward. If I push it back, goes back. Same with my left. If I push forward and back. Now, so generally you want to apply both of these. And if I want to steer, I just let off one of them. Generally, you don't want to do a forward motion and a reverse to do basically a 360. Now the machine will do it, you'll see that. However, when you do that, you're spinning up all that dirt, you're really disturbing the ground, you're basically shoveling all that dirt into your tracks, so it's not ideal. So usually to steer it, if you have a flat open road, you're going straight and just letting off one side to basically gently turn either left or to the right. We'll go over some more advanced turning like jump turns in the advanced portion after this, but that's kind of your basics. Now, the other thing when driving, you should be square to your tracks. The machine will drive, you know, I can be sideways, you know, generally just so you're not confused, I call it getting lined up square to your tracks. Usually for a new operator, I say look out over your feet and that window, the glass there's lines, all your track pads are straight across there. If you can line those up, your machine's straight. You can also look out your left side door and see if you're straight. Now the other final thing is knowing where your drive motors are. Drive motors are generally in the back. That's where you want them. Not a rule, you don't have to, but it's always if I spin this the other way, I'll actually be driving in reverse. It doesn't automatically switch. A lot of times if you don't know which way, I always recommend starting slow just in case you push forward and you actually start going that way because you're lined up the other way. But for a more experienced operator, all you have to do is take a glance down. You can see your idlers. The drive motors are the big bulky pieces inside, so if I look down, I know my drive motors are there. That's the rear of the machine. When you're lining up to dig, highly recommend putting your drive motors should be at your rear, and really for two reasons. One, all of your weight is back there. You got a big counterweight, so it's good to have that back there. But two is just you don't want to that's your expensive part of the machine. So if you're digging out in front, you're putting all that force on the front of the tracks. You also have potential to hit the tracks. The idlers are not nearly as important as the drive motors in the back. So that's why generally you're gonna have those in back, okay? Now for a new operator, so again, I'll take my feet off just to show, again, I don't like to have both. Extend the stick out. For a new operator, I always recommend we just start basic, one motion at a time. So left hand forward, extend the stick. Right forward, bring that about a foot off the ground. Then I'm gonna open my bucket a little bit. Now for just practicing, if we know our site, there's no utilities here. Generally, you wouldn't dig like this for a trench with your teeth straight down and breaking through the ground, but for new operators, get stick time. Just start that way. It's, I think, easiest. So now if I go down, get my teeth in just a little bit, put a little bit of downward pressure. I don't go real aggressive on my first one, and then I just go right hand left and curl that up. And then I pull right hand back to raise it up. Generally, you never want to be too high off the ground. Just whatever your spoil pile is over there, you can probably clear that. Now with my left hand right, usually you want to be about 2 feet over from your trench. You don't want to go too far away because you got to backfill that. But you also don't want to be too close for trench safety. So usually about 2 feet over is about right, and I go right hand, right, open it. Now this is where just open it gently. You know, you get these new operators that'll rocket that thing all the way open. Do it slowly when you open. You get these new operators open it like that all the way, and it'll hit that hard stop that stops it. It's not, that's what it's designed to do, but you don't want it to do that. It's not great if you repeatedly do that. So recommend only doing that limited. I'm gonna go back one more. Now if I put a little bit, you'll see this will actually raise your machine. So you see I can pop a wheelie there, which again, you don't necessarily want to do that if I keep it off the ground. But this also, I'll show you, you know, the bucket can only, so right now I'm going all the way. A lot of times I'll get an indicator here to show hydraulic pressure relief, but the excavators, the Komatsu actually tell you. But what the important thing is here is I don't just want to pull back because my bucket's not closed. You have to have your bucket closed. So this is kind of a two motion one. You pull back in that right, I'm going to my leg and pulling back to curl and raise. This is where I might feel that counterweight in the back picking up, but you want to get a nice full bucket there. And then I'm pulling back, raising it up. Now before I dump this, well actually I'll slide this one over and we'll dump this one, same height. Nice and slow, trying to hit the same pile. Now that I'm all the way out, again, generally you're not gonna be at max reach. We think new operators should start all the way out. For the machine, you're actually more efficient and it's better for the machine if you're just a little bit in. And then we're gonna talk about scraping and digging in layers in the next segment. But I do think for a new operator, I like the further you are from your machine, to me it's safer. You're just not gonna get in trouble. People start bringing the stick in, they don't realize what they're doing. So the other piece you can do is we can now use the stick to come closer to us. So that'll come all the way in. This can go to a 90-degree angle, and this is where you can do a big old scoop right here. And I raise it up. That stick is what's going to control your distance. So generally when you're trenching, things like that, this is why you don't want to be moving your tracks. If you know the width of your machine, like how long, the reach I should say, you're going to go reach out and you're going to drag back, and then you're going to stop, you're going to move your tracks back. They're not done together. Now, a couple things with the cab. You know, first of all, I'm going to bring this closer. Now, if you have a standard bucket on there, these machines are designed, they're not going to hit you in the cab. But as you can see right there, that doesn't mean the material itself is not secured. So if you're sealed, you're going to be in better shape there, but you could have material come through. But don't be worried there. Now, with that said, there is potential if you have a quick coupler, like a quick attach for a bucket, if there's accessories, hydraulics, that's no longer a guarantee. So know your machine and what you have on there, because it might be able to hit the cab. Now, with that said too, as much as it can't hit the cab there, it can absolutely hit the corner. You see how I can come down right here and I could hit the corner of my tracks, which would be very bad. So you do not, that's why we say distance is your friend, is the machine's always gonna be able to hit the corner of the tracks there. Now I'm gonna extend this out. Dump right there. I keep digging a few more here. Now, you saw when I started there, we started with just one motion at a time. You can see if you can see my spoil pile is almost too close. Again, if I was trying to keep a trench clean here, I'd probably be another foot over just so I keep that from happening. For practice purposes, it's fine. Now, initially, I started one motion at a time. Now, what you're gonna wanna do though is get better. You're gonna wanna start doing multiple. So an expert's gonna come in at an angle, scrape this in. So I'm pulling my stick in, I'm raising my boom, and I'm curling the bucket, and you're trying to do all of them at the same time. That's what takes practice. This is the part where I tell you there is not a single video you're gonna watch or a class you're gonna take or whatever that's gonna make you a good operator. What makes you a good operator is seat time. Can't stress that enough. It's tough, I know it's tough to get access to a machine, don't worry on the size, a mini excavator, whatever it is, will give you just as much experience. But you just need to find a place where you can dig a trench, backfill it, dig it again. Keep doing that. That's gonna get you the experience you're gonna need. Okay, so I went over the multiple motions. I think a really valuable exercise, we call it raking for a new operator. It's basically being above ground, is seeing your teeth and trying to rake them along the ground. So the exercise here, if you can find a plot of land and you have teeth on your bucket is ideal, but you could do it with a flat bucket. You're trying to make sure at least one tooth is in the ground, but we're gonna drag this entire bucket in to us, but we cannot, I should always see air, basically. I should see daylight between up to the knuckle, so you never want to bury it. I also recommend, this is a good one to throttle down. This is a finesse activity, so you don't, the higher the throttle, the more jerky those hydraulics are. So if I do this, you're gonna see it's multiple motions. So I'm opening my bucket, I'm bringing my boom up, my stick in, and I'm just watching, and I'm adjusting height. This is where it's really valuable just to watch a machine at a distance, because you're gonna see there's a point here where my stick becomes 90 degrees, and I actually have to start pushing the boom back down because I'm over that kind of fulcrum there. So right here, if I just keep pulling in, you'll see it's gonna pop out of the ground right there, and you see how I kind of went at an angle, whereas if I went down, it would actually bring it back in, down deeper into the ground. So you're kind of doing multiple here, so I can start pushing down to actually get further. Again, went right up to the knuckle there. So not a great example, but that's a really easy exercise to do. The reason that's important, if you can do that above ground and see it, that's gonna be the skill you're gonna need when we talk about trenching in the next one for being more advanced. It's doing that multiple motion. So if I just do this where I'm even above ground, if you don't wanna tear up the ground, if I just rake this thing and just try and get your teeth so they don't sink. So it really, as long as you get a predetermined, I'm trying to run this bucket right along the top of the surface here. So this is another way, if you don't even want to break the surface, you're trying to say, can I keep the same height? Because you have to make those adjustments. And now I'm gonna have to go push it forward here. This is what you're gonna do in the next video. So that said, I'm gonna throttle back up real quick. We're gonna go backfilling. Now backfilling, a lot of people want to, can I just use the side of the bucket? You could try. These machines are not designed laterally. They don't have a ton of lateral force. The power in an excavator is in that boom arm and those cylinders. So generally, if there's a lot of material, you want to scoop and put it in there. We can use the side of the bucket for some finesse, kind of grading at the end of that, but you're not going to want to use the whole thing. So with that said, I usually recommend starting on the side closest to the hole or trench, because what you can do is I can take a scoop here, and instead of even raising it up, I can try and drag it in there a little bit. So you can see you can do that. And I'm just gonna come out there. Now the key here is trying to make sure you don't dig down. This is where that raking exercise even helps here, because I'm judging, I can't see my teeth, but I'm trying to make sure I don't break the surface underneath that pile, because I'm not trying to create a new hole. But again, I rake that in, I'm curling my bucket, I'm trying, and then I'm swiveling at the same time. I'm doing a swing there to put it right in. Now what happens here, this is where you start learning how to use some other pieces of that machine. So, first of all, you can use the back of the bucket to rake things away from you. So if I have material close, I just go like this and I push it out. Same thing though when I hit that point, see how I'm pushing my boom down like that. Now if you do that, you do want to open that bucket. You do not want to have your bucket curled all the way like this. I've seen this, and the operator can't see this. From the outside, you can see it though. The big joint that has the boom cylinder, or I'm sorry, the bucket cylinder and everything, the connections, you're gonna pack a bunch of dirt in there, it's not gonna be effective. So you always wanna make sure you're using the back, you're retracting that entire cylinder, and I'm just using the bottom underside of the bucket. The other piece now, like I said, is this is where you can use the side of it to kind of do a finished touch. So I'm getting the bucket, I want the teeth horizontal. You don't want to have it curled, otherwise I'm going to kind of create a valley. I'm going to be like this. And you kind of go through and just shave off layers. So I'm going to go one, I'm going to come in closer to me, make my adjustment for it, like that. Now eventually, I'm trying to cover all my area. Now you'll rarely, because we were dumping all the way out, I won't be able to reach the outside edge, so that's where potentially driving it up a little bit. And either raking that in, so sometimes if you can't reach it, you can pull that material in, like that. And again, this is where we're just trying to not disturb the surface that much. This is something, again, I can't stress enough, that the only way you get good at this Like I said, I am not an expert myself, I'll tell you that. It just takes practice. And then the final thing is, if you do backfill it, I'm not completely done, but for the sake of this, we'll be done. You can use the bottom of the machine to pack it down if you need to. Again, I can put all that force right in that machine right there, basically 26 tons on the bottom of that. So I can pack it down, or sometimes they call it track packing, when I can actually drive my tracks back and forth over it to put all that weight on it. Back up here, always watch where you're going backwards. A lot of times if you're gonna spin to see. And there you go, those were the basics. Basic 101 controls. What we'll do in the next segment is we'll do a little bit more advanced. We'll go over some other things, but that was our basic 101 controls. Okay, so now we're going to go into the more advanced, our 201 training. You saw the basic controls, really entry-level things. Now I'll go over just a few other pieces with trenching, crossing a trench, a few other pieces there, jump turns like that. Now, I'm going to go ahead, again, I've already gone over all the basic controls last segment, so I'll just get myself ready here. Now, we talked a little bit, I want to talk a little bit more about trenching. So I know we did some trenching already in the first one. Now, you saw in the first one, we had the bucket all the way out, fully extended. Now, generally, I think I told you in the first one, that's not the best to do. Usually, you're going to have it in just a little bit. So if I extend out here, just a little bit in, but the key here is really to do the best for trenching is doing it in layers. You don't want to go down there and just rip those teeth all the way through going 3 or 4 feet down. Again, even though like our site, we know there's no underground utilities, but a site you may not know. You may old cable, wire, whatever it is, but it's better just to kind of bring it in layers. And usually that means you're going to be at about a 45 and you're going to be pulling it in towards you. So I'm out here and I start pulling, and so a lot of that's just with the stick, and I'm doing layers where I'm going to try and shave off maybe 6 inches to a foot. Up, and again about 2 feet over, trying to dump it far enough where it's not going to fall in, it's going to not cave in the trench or anything like that, but also far enough or close enough that you're going to be able to get it back in there, backfilling it. So again, so you see how I just took about a foot off and I'm just shaving. So a lot of this is using the stick. This is where that raking exercise is extremely helpful. The other piece while I'm doing this is we talked a little bit about, track positioning. Generally, straight over your tracks is going to be the best. It's where you're the most stable. However, you can dig other directions that you're just going to feel the machine's not quite as stable. Now we talked about the drive motors. Again, as much as possible, you want to dig with the idlers up front. That's one, the weight is going to be in the back with the final drive, and two, it's just the idlers are designed to take a little bit more of that beating, where you don't want to do that on your drive motors. Now, a couple of things we didn't necessarily go over in the first one. So as you're, wherever we're digging, understanding, so I talked about how you want to do this square to your tracks. Big thing to understand too, unless you have a zero turn machine that's got, basically it's not gonna have a counterweight overhanging the back. You're gonna have that. You're gonna have a counterweight. Right now I'm in line, the tracks are actually my longest part. But if I swing, it's always important to understand that your counterweight is usually about 4 to 5 feet out the back when I'm on the side. This is really important if you're in a tight job site and you're swinging around your back end. This often is why you're going to see counterweights that have scrapes on them. They've got, whether it's dirt, they kind of turn right into a pile, things like that. That's how you can easily tell. You'll see in the corners. Now granted, the counterweight, you're not necessarily going to damage anything, but of course, anytime you can avoid contact with something, you want to. So that's why it's important to know, like when I'm pulling up over here to do this trench, you notice I'm swinging to the right. I know already what's behind me to the left. I know there's nothing there. So you're going to want to take that into consideration when you're doing that is how is my counterweight? Which way am I swinging? Do I have plenty of clearance on that? Again, they do have a zero turn swing machines that are basically, they're rounded and they'll stay within that footprint. Not typically, those probably aren't the most common machines. Now, as you'll see, I'm kind of digging down layers till I'm getting down to about 4 feet. Couple things here at the end of these too, just so you see how I've got a big pile in front of me in my tracks. So part of it is so now I'm just scraping out the bottom. One of the things here is once you get to that point, the reason I've got a big pile of dirt right in front of me. That's really because I keep scooping it up. As I curl this, if I start pushing that stick back out a little bit, you see how that material falls down kind of into my bucket or back into the hole. That way you're avoiding having a big old pile right up there in front of you. For this, if I'm extending the trench longer, it doesn't really matter that much. Now for safety, again, you generally want to have your spoil pile about 2 feet away, so it doesn't make that collapse at all, but it's close enough to backfill. And then for trenching, anything over 4 feet, you need to have a trench box if anyone's gonna be working down there. Typically, you don't generally need to trench much deeper than that for utilities or whatever you're gonna be placing at all. So, but that's, again, I've probably got over 4 feet a little bit, but if I do that and I back up, put that stick, you see how it just falls, the material falls back in. And if you're doing this right, you're gonna have a nice line right along the trench. So either if you're backfilling, it'll be easier with the excavator, or if you're using a dozer, it's really easy. Once I do that, I've got about a 28-foot reach on this, so I've probably got 20 feet or so there. Then all it is just backing up. And this is where, looking behind you, you can always spin your machine a little bit, see where you're going. I'll back up 20 feet, till I go, we'll go a little bit further here. And then the same thing, I'm just gonna repeat that same motion. Again, still doing layers. So I'm gonna shave off layers there. And this is where that raking exercise comes in really handy. Okay, so we'll move on. So there you go, that's kind of trenching, some other techniques there. The biggest thing, again, practice. Practice is what's gonna make you good at this. That raking exercise we showed in the 101, the entry level, it's all about how do you control that boom and stick. If you can keep that the same height and you're curling it, sometimes I can't stress enough, it's tough to see this when it's in the ground. So that's why it may look silly if you're on a job site, but sometimes it doesn't matter. I don't care if you're 3 feet in the air and you can see that bucket. It's just a challenge to see if you can maintain that same height and you're rolling it in and you're trying to get the teeth to scrape along the bottom there. And this is another piece I recommend. I think it's one thing to sit in the operator seat. If you just sit there and study a operator and watch, you start to learn what those pivot points are, when that sticks out, things like that. And it really helps you just to see a bigger picture when you can see the machine operating, how it operates, how those different joints, what that does to the machine. So, okay, so that is that. I'm gonna back up a little bit. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go over jump turns. Jump turns, a lot of different ways to turn an excavator. Obviously, the tracks right here, that's probably the most common. And the way you should really do it is you generally want to have both tracks moving. You rarely want to have one forward, one reverse, because you are just going to gouge out the ground and scoop up all the material. So you really don't want to do that. You want to be going forward and then just let off on whatever side you want to turn. So if I had full left forward and I let off my right one, I'd start turning to the right. Now if you're in a tight area or you're trying to not disturb the ground, there's a jump turn. And that's basically where you're using this boom bucket to lift your machine and make that turn. Now the way you're doing this, and generally there's a couple, you can either be straight out in front of you. Usually I recommend going about 45 to the direction you want to go. So if I want to go, we're going to try and go to the right. I'm going to try and swing my bucket flat and go to the right. Now, the part here, it's really trying, there's kind of two separate motions. One, understanding your tracks, you're trying to get the forward motion of your tracks to go to the right. That means your undercarriage, you're gonna steer it to the right. So on this one, it's gonna be left forward, right back to kind of turn it like that. And then the counterintuitive part comes in your swing. Once we're off the ground here, we're gonna go to the left, we're gonna swing, because I wanna go right, I'm gonna go left with my swing, and you're just gonna go till you're facing the other direction there. Now you do not wanna raise this, so all you have to be is a few inches off the ground. You know, this does put a little bit of undue pressure, strain on, not if you're too much, you're gonna put on the edge of the track shoes, and you know, other than that, putting on the drive motors in the back, things like that. So you don't want to do this too aggressively there. It's just a few inches off the ground. But right there, so I'm off the ground just a little bit there. I'd say I'm 4 inches off or so. That's right there. And now if I just go with my tracks, I'm going to take my feet. I've got my left one going forward and my right one going back. And I'm turning till I'm about 45 the other direction. And then I'm popping it down. Same thing, if I want to continue to turn it, I will go 45 over here. I will raise it off the ground a little bit. And then the same thing, we're going to go left forward, right back. We're always trying to get the undercarriage to go that way, and then I'm swinging with my left tracks. And that's actually where I'm trying to line up, right here. But you'll notice what I did there, it kept me from disturbing the ground too much. It was able to basically lift it up and over those tracks, over the ground, instead of digging into it. Now, again, I would not recommend doing that all the time. It's more of a as needed, depending on the site. If you need to do 180 degrees, I would probably do a jump turn, just because it's tough to, I'd rather do that than go ahead and pull one reverse. But also when you're driving, just try and understand where you're trying to go dig and make sure you're positioned where you need to be. So that's jump turns. Now, okay, next we're gonna go over crossing a trench. So as we just showed you with the jump turn, you can use the boom to actually pick up the machine and walk it across things. So first and foremost, make sure you understand the length of your track. So from personal experience, you can at times sink these things in. So we just made a small trench here. Now, again, we're dealing with really soft ground. So our site, that can make a determining factor of whether you're gonna try and do this. So I'm gonna kind of go towards the edge, and this is where you could see what that material is gonna do when you're coming up. I can see this is a fairly soft material, and I'm gonna try and walk it across. But the more, you wanna do then is reach out. And you know what, I'm actually going in. So you can either have your bucket flat, or if I know I'm going into something that's harder over there, you can either bite in with your teeth as one way to pull it, or if you're trying to avoid disturbing it, just putting that bottom of that bucket relatively flat on the ground, you're just gonna use that point. You're just gonna apply just a little bit of pressure. Now the key here is slow. If you go too fast, what happens is the bottom of those tracks act like conveyor belts, and they start pulling that material, that edge that we're going off of. So it's really challenging to try and get this where it's nice and even, and you can see both sides when I see the material. Now, once you see you're over it, and this is where you're trying to just span it, and I can see on the right side there, I still have, and I can push up just a little bit. Once you can see that you're spanning that, you can slowly relieve the pressure there to bring it down. And then all you're doing is, before you spin, you want to try and pull all that weight tight. The more your weight's towards your core, the more stable you are. Then you're slowly swinging over to the other side. And I can see my trench there. And then it's basically going to be the opposite here. I'm going to set this kind of closer with my stick 90. About like that. And then I'm just ever so slightly, I'm putting the pressure on it. I can already feel my back end, so you want to try and make sure you've got enough material that it doesn't rock you into that. So, and this is where on a soft environment, I can feel part of that. So the other option here, if I know, so as I felt that, it's knowing what you're crossing there. If you feel that your one side is going to be going down into the ground, you can kind of work yourself into a little bit of a trench. You're going to raise that up ever so slightly and try and get yourself out of it without sinking the other end. And then you can kind of try and push yourself over as we're doing that. So as I'm doing that, and I can see that my one track is basically, and I'm bringing it down. So you can see what happened there is it's a very soft, so if you have a soft side, that's what's gonna happen. So you gotta make sure that you're firm, and I was able to feel that and make that adjustment. And then I'm on the other side. That's crossing a trench. If I have to go the other side or get myself into a position like that, same thing, this time I'm going reverse. Now I already know I have a soft side, so I'm going to try and keep my track end up. Right there. I already know I'm gonna feel that, the side of that thing is collapsing in just a little bit. So that's where understanding what you're going over, and this is where sometimes pushing yourself over a little bit, if you can, putting those teeth in the ground, basically to give you a little bit of bite in there. But I know that as soon as I put downward pressure, that's gonna drive that on that, and I can feel that back end going already right there. That's why as you're raising, you're pushing. And right now I'm holding myself, so you can see I can push myself up right there. I'm using the teeth to bite in there, and I can continue to go over. And then I'm raising this back up gently. And then I can spin back around. Oh, remember you're in reverse, that's always helpful. And that's crossing a trench. Again, it's not, depending on the material, as you saw right there, I was in a very soft environment, but you saw what the excavator can do. There's a lot of utility to using that boom and bucket to lift yourself. So you can always use that when needed to get you out of one of those situations. Just be careful with it. So again, there's crossing a trench. Okay, finally we're gonna go over approaching an incline going up a hill. We've got a small hill here, but the concept's the same. Lots of different ways to do this. Again, it's gonna be using that boom and bucket a little bit, but there's two different schools of thought here. I recommend the drive motors being on going up the hill first. You want as much weight out in front of you to kind of help pull you up that hill. Some other people, whether it's pushing or pulling on that sprocket, might recommend it on the backside. Again, I don't believe there's a right or wrong on this. Everyone's got their own kind of method there. So with this, if you were going up on trying to get on top of a pile to basically load dump trucks or whatever, again, this right here, so you can see what I've got right here. This is a fairly steep hill. So what you want to do is you're going to put that bucket way out in front of you. And again, depending on what you're going up, if you can put the teeth in and kind of bite in, that would be preferred. If you're going in an area where you don't want to disturb that, then obviously you're going to have it roughly flat. For this, I don't really care as much on this. So what we'll do is I'm just going to put a little bit of downward pressure here. And the same thing, I'm just walking myself up this hill. So as I get to a point here, I'm then I'm halfway up. If I can pull myself all the way up, that's fine. The other method here is to spin, and we're gonna push ourselves up the other way. So again, keeping that weight centered, nice and tight. And there we're at the bottom. This is also why you wear a seatbelt in these machines. And then all you're doing is you're gonna be able to push yourself up. You'll see I can actually lift the machine. So if I do that, I'm actually gonna be able to lift the machine all the way up. So whether you're walking yourself, now for this example, I'm I'm not going to go real far because the back here. So once we're balancing there, this is where once we're over, we'll continue to drive. I would spin it back around and be able to continue the track. Now this one, we're kind of on a little bit of a perch here, so I know I'm going to go back down on the other side. And I could, once you know you have a center point, you're kind of balanced. This is where understanding your machine, and I can pull myself out. You can see even just me pulling that weight, you can see how it's kind of rocking me over the top. Always low. You want to keep that bucket, that counterweight, as low as possible in front of you. The higher I go, the less stable my machine is. But if I keep going here, now I know I can catch the bottom of my machine as I'm coming over this thing. And what you can do is then drop the machine, and I can settle it back down on the other side. So I'm gonna, in this example, we're actually gonna go back the other way. So again, once you feel stable, if I had this up on an incline, I'm gonna make a platform, whatever I'm gonna do, but you saw how I use that bucket to kind of get me up and stable. Again, spinning, anytime you swing that machine, keeping that weight tight to your core. That makes you much more stable. You're gonna be able to, it's just a more secure way to do that. Now the same thing going down. You can either have those teeth down, flat, and this is where you're just giving yourself enough room there to have this bucket flat. And then I'm gonna keep going out. And on this one, same thing. If you saw, this is something where you can kind of bridge that gap. So now that I know I can let myself down, I can control my descent here. So I can slowly bring this down. Now I've got my bucket and everything right in front of me. So as steep as I get here, I know I can't go anywhere. I've got this right in front of me here. So the machine is very stable. I'm watching till my tracks come down. And now my tracks are on the ground, so I know I can continue. I'm keeping that bucket as I'm going. I'm still adjusting it there. And there we go, basically off that hill. Perfect, now let's go over to parking. Okay, finally we're gonna go over parking. So a couple of the end of the day routines here. Obviously make sure bucket's empty, as much dirt as possible. And then to clear, you gotta clear your tracks. Now, I always use a shovel at the end, but I also think you sometimes use the tool you're in, and a lot of times you can raise these tracks up a little bit. So if I go on one side and just gently raise up that one side, doesn't have to be very high, and if I just run it like that, I can run a lot of that material, that shaking, that vibration will probably clear a decent bit of it. Again, I wouldn't recommend going that high, but that's one side. And then on the other, again, just ever so slightly putting it up and running that track system to kind of clear out the tracks. After that, setting it back down gently, bringing it around. Now for parking, you always want to make sure you're square to your tracks or a hair to the right. You need to get that step. So I've seen people try and park it, off to the side and they can't get out. You need 3 points contact. So it's either straight and forward, or if you go a hair to the right, you'll have a little bit bigger step, but generally I put it pretty straight. And then we're gonna put bucket flat on the ground. Just like that. Again, different schools of thought on whether or not, if you are gonna have someone coming in greasing it later, or if you're gonna grease it, you're gonna want it fully extended so you can get to all those points on there. Again, most of them will have grease points on the back of the boom arm anyways, so it's really up to you. There's no right or wrong on that. Once I'm flat there, I've checked I want fuel, def, all that. I'm gonna put my lock lever down, and then I'm just gonna let it idling 30 seconds at most. These newer machines with the diesel exhaust, they don't want them to over idle, and then I'll shut the machine down. Seatbelt off, and then afterwards, you always, before you leave for the end of the day, make sure your machine's cleaned up. There's no trash in it. Whether it's a company machine, whoever owns that's paying a lot, they want to know you're respecting or taking care of the machine, or if you're sharing the machine, people don't want to get in and see whatever, junk food, wrappers in there or whatever. So make sure you keep your machine clean. Swing that door open. Always make sure it's locked. 3 points of contact. Now for us, we keep a little hand broom in all of our machines on the side, but that includes sweeping these machines out. Again, it's little things like that that just show that you're respecting the machine. It's an expensive piece of equipment, so you want to take care of it. After that, I'm going to close it. After that, the two final things we do, anytime I get out of a machine at the end of the shift, I do a walk around, make sure there's nothing, I didn't miss anything, there's no damage or anything like that. You're making sure you're topped off if you need to, everything if you see any leaks or anything like that, it might happen. The final thing is it's always important to clean out your track. So you saw, I basically raised them up a little bit, but then you want to have a shovel or some tool around and you're going to shovel out those tracks. Again, it's important to go all the way around, clean out your undercarriage. This really prolongs the life of the rollers and everything there, so it's always important to clean out your tracks at the end of the shift. Okay, everyone, that was our long version excavator training. That was kind of the complete overview. Again, we have individual videos on our YouTube channel that breaks that into segments, but I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks a lot for watching.